Conventions. Social life is made of conventions. All social spheres have and produce conventions that guide how people behave with one another, or even with themselves, according to their sense of social belonging. Conventions exist in traffic rules, when one has to drive on the right side of the road in some countries and on the left side in others. In an evening with friends, when nobody criticizes the host's culinary disaster. In certain cultures, when punctuality is required, while for others it is not as important. There may be a sanction for disregard of a convention. For example, when a player is not selected for an official match because he did not attend training. Conventions are also present in various institutions and on different levels. They can be found within the family and within the state. Conventions are expressed more or less formally through oral or written language and through overt or more discreet attitudes. While conventions are similar to rules, they are not necessarily defined. Their definition is therefore less obvious, and their origin is hardly known. Who knows why one uses their right hand for a handshake? Why is it rather a hug or a kiss, or a simple gesture without any physical contact in other cultures? However, although they do not necessarily show the best form of conduct to adopt, conventions influence behavior, especially in situations of uncertainty. We do things a certain way because this is how other people would do them, or because it is how we would like them to do them, or because we think they would wish the same if they were in an identical situation. Conventions also exist in business, and an entrepreneur has to deal with many. He deals with the conventions of business creation when he has to submit a business plan to a stakeholder. The entrepreneur often has to present a detailed provisional budget in accordance with accounting rules for at least 3 years following the launch of the business. He may argue that a business model approach is more relevant to justify the possible lack of a business plan, but he will not always be heard because conventions are tenacious. The entrepreneur also considers his partner's conventions, both in terms of practices and priorities. For example, in a business project designed to add value to research findings, it is useful to understand the behavior of the researcher partner, who is obviously more driven by the recognition of a scientific quest than by economic success. One should also take into account conventions related to the nature of the project, cleanliness for a restaurant kitchen, security or access for disabled people in public places, ergonomics for digital tools, access to personal information for databases, the way products are made and services are provided, etc. Other categories of conventions arise from the singularity of certain situations. The entrepreneur should take such singularity into account, as it reflects a particular history, culture, territory, etc., which altogether create new conventions. Such is the case for negotiations that either go on in time or have to be conducted around a good meal, etc. According to the theory of conventions, a convention is often presented as a non-explicit agreement. However, we believe that it can have a more formal character, especially when considered in its legal sense. It may then be a collective agreement supplementing the labor code, legal statuses, or a shareholders' agreement about certain aspects of governance. In that case, it usually defines best practice standards or at least quality expectations. The question is often asked as to whether a law is a convention. The law tries to guide behavior by distinguishing right from wrong. However, individuals of a given community will not necessarily refer to it. A law in itself is not a convention, even though its promoters would like it to be. It all depends on the meaning given to the term convention. But the entrepreneur understands that conventions may take many forms. He has to comply with the blurred boundaries between formal and informal, explicit and implicit, written and unwritten. In the end, what are the fundamentals that we need to remember about this component, which is more difficult to grasp than others because it is often absent from strategic models, even though conventions guide the behavior of stakeholders? To answer that question, let's risk a sports analogy. The conventions set the game rules, which sports competitors must conform to. The most formal ones are the most difficult to circumvent, as are the oldest and most visible ones. However, other more or less new ways can often be proposed for the purpose of innovation. Isn't that how rugby was born? Some rules can be circumvented. Dick Fosbury did so during an international competition by doing the high jump backwards, a technique which now bears his name. These rules sometimes change. For example, to prevent acts of foul ball in soccer, a team is now sanctioned if its goalkeeper keeps the ball in hand for more than 6 seconds. The sanction is given by the referee, who has to identify cheaters, such as players scoring with their hand and thinking it is okay to do so. Whether it is okay or not depends both on the point of view of the other players and the position of the observer of the deviant act. In the human world, there are always cheaters. However, a good player will always earn respect and notoriety, and that's good for business.